A Father's Vision. Artur Pawlowski has been living in Canada with his wife and children since 1995. He had been an entrepreneur and developer for many years. In the year 2000, he had an experience which totally changed his life. In 1990, we emigrated to Greece, and from Greece to Canada. My child is born on the 28th of March 2000, so on my birthday, and is named Nathaniel, which in Hebrew means God's gift. However, there's one serious problem, because he's born dead. He's not breathing. He's all blue, and I'm looking into my wife's eyes and I see total fear and panic. A woman who gives birth subconsciously desires and expects the baby to cry, but here there was no crying. The doctors and nurses started running around getting specialist equipment. It turned out that my son had been born with a hole in his diaphragm, and due to this, all his internal organs, stomach, intestines, had destroyed everything in his chest, moving his heart to the other side and totally crushing his left lung. He couldn't breathe. I remember a meeting of 3 doctors who came up to me and said my child would not live. There was no chance of survival. And even if he did survive, he would be a vegetable all his life. My wife stayed in hospital in the maternity ward, and I remember how I went down to the car park and started shouting and kicking the car. I started challenging God, shouting out, "Why me? Why are you doing this to me?" My wife, however, called all her friends, started praying for the baby, started reading the Bible to him, played him songs 24 hours a day, and stroked him, touched and spoke to him. But I couldn't even get myself to touch my son. So my wife slept at the hospital, spent time with our son, talking with him, while I would take her place for a few hours when I returned from work. And I was standing in the same particular place, and suddenly it was like a film started running, like a huge TV screen stood in front of my face, and I was drawn into something, which, even the day before, I would never have believed. I saw Jesus in Gethsemane. I saw how terribly afraid he was. I saw him sweating blood. It was a terrifying fear. It was obvious that he was very, very afraid. I saw how a crowd of angry people approached from the right, enraged, seething with hate. There were over 1,000 of them. I saw them go up to him and ask him whether he is Jesus. He said, "I am." And I saw how the whole mob, Roman soldiers with their swords, the Pharisees with their robes, normal people, people with wooden clubs. I saw all these people and how a mighty force hit them in the back of their heads. That's what it looked like. And the whole crowd, each of them, that whole horde of furious people fell on their faces before Jesus. I saw how they got up, grabbed him with their hands, pulled him about, and laughing and mocking him, took him to the Sanhedrin, to the people in power, who scoffed at him and mocked him. They asked him questions, but were not interested in the answers. I saw a court that sentenced that man. I saw how they ran up to him, hitting him with terrible blows. He got hit on the side of the head, and I saw how the blood spurted out, almost like drops falling onto my face. Not only was I watching it, and the picture was just in front of me, but it was like I was actually there in that situation. It was so terrifying that I ran out of the hospital. I went back to the hospital the next day, and I stood in the same place as before, looking at my son in that hermetic place in intensive care in the Children's Hospital in Calgary. Again, in one moment, another film. A similar television appeared, really huge, and I was pulled into a situation where I saw Jesus in front of people again. People who were accusing and shouting at him, laughing, debating. It was very loud, and each time Jesus was hit. He was led to Pontius Pilate. I saw how Pilate was intrigued by Jesus. It was amazing that after I had seen how the Jews treated him, in other words, the Jewish authorities in Israel, Pilate approached the situation in a totally different way. He was intrigued, interested. He wanted to get to know the person about whom so much had been said. He asked him questions, which Jesus answered. And then Pilate sent him back to the Sanhedrin. And then the nightmare started again. I remember seeing a young man run up. He ran up and grabbed him by the beard, and the impact was so huge that as he grabbed the beard, the impact and momentum of the body pulled off a patch of skin together with the beard.
Impact jego ciała i tego zderzenia wyrwało mu płat razem z brodą.
It was so horrendous. I was in total shock. I was unable to handle it. What I was watching was too brutal for me. I ran out of the hospital once again. I didn't want to go back to the hospital, but I went back for a third time. And for a third time I saw what happened to Jesus Christ. I saw how the Romans beat him. They used tools to beat him with. Whole patches of skin were pulled off from each part of his body, from his face, his head. It was one great big pulp. There was no place on his body that was not covered in blood or wounds. It was so brutal, so terrible, but I understood that the one who was allowing me to see what had happened wanted me to watch it to the end. The pain of a father who was watching what they were doing to his child. The pain of a God who could have wiped them all off the face of the earth and create a new heaven and new earth. I felt his pain, how he was suffering. I felt what he was thinking, and it was terrifying. When you have the power to do something, but you choose not to do it, then you can see the true power of love. They led Jesus to the hill, which was situated just outside the town, but visible and close. I saw a city that was also built on a hill, where a lot of people could watch that event, that spectacle. The hill was at a junction, and a lot of people passed by. They could see what went on there. It was a place of warning. Jesus Christ was crucified naked, totally without any covering. His body was massacred to such an extent that there was not even a centimeter without blood. His face was so obliterated that you couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. It was one great red, gaping wound. I saw how he gave up his spirit, how he died on the cross. I saw a frightening darkness which was impossible to explain. We're used to a kind of darkness which we know. Maybe there's a star, the moon, or some other kind of light. This was a terrifying darkness, a horrific darkness. Nothing at all was visible. I saw an earthquake. The earth broke in two. It wasn't just a local earthquake, just there in Israel. The whole world literally split in half. I saw a leaf of grass. I saw the grass crying. How a tear trickled down the grass. I saw a small bird with a small beak. A small head. I didn't recognize that kind of bird. I didn't know such birds exist. And I saw how a tear trickled down. And that was the end. The vision ended. The television turned off. I saw that I was once again in intensive therapy in Calgary, in hospital. I saw my son, the little body laying on that huge machine which was keeping him alive. And I heard a voice, just like you're hearing my voice now, and I hear, "What would you do to save your son?" I answered immediately, without thinking. "Anything. Tell me to kill and I'll do it. I'll kill half the hospital if it will save my son." The voice which was speaking to me didn't change its tone. It didn't laugh. There was no surprise in its tone. It just replied in that same tone, "But you can't do anything. You can't save your son. But I could have saved my son, but I didn't. Do you know why?" And there was a pause. For you, and for other people. At that moment, I think for the first time in my life, I realized what kind of person I was. I saw two hearts. I saw the heart of that God who I didn't want to have anything to do with. I saw a crystal clear, white, beautiful heart. A crystal heart that was transparent. I can't really explain it. And I saw a second heart, also the heart of a father, but blackened with tar, dirty, sinful, kind of ugly. And I realized that God was a father, and I am a father. But I was ready to hurt another person, to hurt another mother. For that nightmare to finish, I was ready in my heart to hurt another person. But God, the Father, chose to suffer. And chose to suffer for who? For a person like me? For such a hopeless person like I was then? It totally broke my heart. I felt like my
Czułem,
heart
jakby moje
broke in
serce
two
pękło
when I
w tym
realized who
momencie,
I
kiedy zdałem
was
sobie sprawę,
and who God
kim
was.
byłem ja, a kim był Bóg.
I remember a
Pamiętam,
prayer
było
meeting being organized to
zorganizowane
pray for my
spotkanie
son,
modlitewne w intencji mojego syna.
and due to what I had
Przez
seen,
to, co
I
zobaczyłem,
also went to that
pojechałem
meeting.
również na to spotkanie.
And in a
Już
totally
zupełnie
different
inaczej,
way,
nie
not
tak
like
jak
previously,
kiedyś,
when a
kiedy
preacher said,
kaznodzieja mówił,
God loves you,
Bóg
I shouted
kocha
in my heart,
mnie,
liar,
krzyczałem w
or God
sercu,
heals, and I
kłamstwo,
shouted
Bóg
false.
uzdrawia, ja krzyczałem
I
fałsz.
stood at the back
Stanąłem z
and
tyłu,
lifted up my hands,
podniosłem
and I told
ręce
God this,
w górę, do góry
God,
i powiedziałem Bogu
I
tak,
give my son
Boże,
Nathaniel to
oddaję
you,
Ci swojego syna.
just like
Nathaniela,
Abraham
tak
sacrificed
jak
his own son,
Abraham
Isaac, on the altar.
oddał na ołtarzu Izaaka.
I give you my son
Daję
on
Ci
the
mojego
altar,
syna na ołtarzu.
and no matter what you
I bez względu
decide,
na to, co
whatever happens to my
postanowisz, co się
son,
stanie z moim synem,
whether
czy
you
go
take him
weźmiesz do
home or
domu,
not, I give you
czy
my
nie,
word
ja daję
that
Ci
I will
słowo,
serve you
że
until
będę
the
Ci
day
służył
I
do końca
die.
życia. I pamiętam,
And I
zacząłem
remember that I
płakać,
started to cry
jakby
like never
nigdy do tej
before,
pory.
how the
Pamiętam, jak
tears
łzy
fell down my
mi
face,
ciekły i za każdym,
and with every tear
każdą
trickled
łzą
away everything I had ever
spływało
done.
wszystko to, co do tej pory
Every
robiłem.
tear
Każda
represented a
łza
sin I had committed.
reprezentowała jakiś grzech, który zrobiłem.
I saw tears from when I was a
Widziałem
money
łzy,
changer,
jak byłem cinkciarzem,
how I had
jak
smuggled
przemycałem
alcohol,
alkohol,
how I had
jak
smuggled
przemycałem
gold during the
złoto
communist
jeszcze za czasów
times,
komunistycznych, jak robiłem
how I had done business in
biznes,
Greece and business in
w
Canada.
Grecji, później biznes w Kanadzie.
With every
Jak
tear,
z każdą
every
łzą,
bottle I had drunk,
każda butelka, którą
everything I
wypiłem,
had
każda
done
rzecz,
started to
którą
flow
zrobiłem,
away,
wypływała.
and I
Zacząłem
started to
płakać
cry
jeszcze
even
bardziej.
more.
Później
Later,
zacząłem
I
szlochać.
started to
Cały
sob.
czas miałem ręce
My
w
hands
górze,
were in the air the whole
z
time, with my son
moim
on the
synem na
altar.
ołtarzu.
My son was operated on by surgeons, Mrs.
taka
Eccles,
pani
who was famous for her
Eccles
work
się
with
nazywa,
difficult
bardzo sławna
cases.
specjalistka od trudnych przypadków.
Sometime later, I had the chance to read her report, where she wrote that when they opened him up, there had been no trace of a left lung.
Nie było nawet śladu.
The heart was on the wrong side,
Serce było po drugiej stronie.
so the doctors couldn't do anything. They
Medycy
sewed him up
nic nie
again.
mogli zrobić. Zszyli mojego syna ponownie.
And I remember returning
Kiedy
from work to the
wracałem
hospital,
po pracy do szpitala,
and those same three doctors who had
tych samych
spoken with me in the
lekarzy, którzy
beginning
przyszli na początku,
invited me into their
poprosili mnie
office
do
and said,
siebie i powiedzieli
"You
tak,
need to come with
musisz
us.
z nami
We
iść,
need to
musimy
show
ci
you
coś
something.
pokazać. Wydarzyło
Something has
się
happened in
coś
the
w
hospital
szpitalu
and we
i
need to
musimy
show
ci to
you."
pokazać. Zaprowadzili
They took
mnie
me
do
to a room
pomieszczenia,
with
w
X-ray
którym
pictures,
były
and they said,
zdjęcia rentgenowskie.
"Look at the first
I
one.
pokazali mi
Here are the
zdjęcia.
internal
Mówi, zobacz
organs.
pierwsze.
Here are the
Tutaj są
intestines.
wszystkie
This is where the
wnętrzności. Tutaj
lung
są
should be.
jelita. Tutaj
Here is the
powinno być
heart.
płuco, którego nie było.
Now
Tutaj
look at the
serce.
next one.
Ale zobacz następne.
This morning,
Dzisiaj rano
your son started to
twój
fight
syn
with the
zaczął walczyć z
machines.
aparaturą.
He started to
Twój
breathe,
syn
and that is
zaczął
impossible from a
oddychać,
medical
a
point
jest
of view.
niemożliwe z punktu medycznego, aby on
We
oddychał.
took X-rays every
Zaczęliśmy co
hour,
godzinę robić
and in a few
zdjęcia.
hours the
W
heart
ciągu
returned to
kilku
its natural
godzin
position,
serce
and
wróciło
the
na
lung which was
naturalne
missing
miejsce.
started to
A
grow.
płuco, którego nie
It's getting
było,
bigger
zaczęło się
and bigger
rozrastać.
by the
Co
hour.
godzinę
Look at the
jest coraz
latest
większe
picture.
i większe. Zobacz
They
na
showed me the
zdjęcie,
heart in its
pokazali
correct
mi
position,
serce, które było już tam,
and
gdzie powinno
lungs that
być,
were of
i
natural
płuco,
size.
które było już praktycznie naturalnej wielkości.
They said they had called a meeting of all the best specialists in the country, and they had spoken about my son, reaching the following conclusion: "Your God has obviously answered your prayers. This is a child who shouldn't be alive, and he's alive. He shouldn't be able to breathe, and he's breathing. It's almost like he's a child who has fallen from the stars. We've called him the child from the stars. In other words, star baby." And that's why all these people saw what had happened, saw that there had been a miracle in Calgary, and the only person who hadn't heard about it was me. That's why they were pointing at me, saying, "That's the Father." The doctors said that from a medical point of view, there is authentically, absolutely no explanation for what happened in the year 2000.
na to, co się wydarzyło w roku 2000.
And up to today,
Dnia dzisiejszego
I've kept my word, which I had given
słowa,
God then.
które dałem
I serve
wtedy
Him.
Bogu i Mu służę.
Ty się
Today, Nathaniel is a healthy young 17-year-old man. In 2003, Artur founded a church for the homeless on the streets of Calgary, and since then he has defended the rights of each citizen to publicly express their faith. Thanks to cooperation with Artur, several dozen such churches have been founded around the world, including in Poland. Artur also organizes events called March for Jesus. They take place regularly in several dozen cities around the world. If people understood the power of what happened on the cross, they would never live just for themselves. The whole world would have heard about a God who chose suffering and death so that we could live. With such an understanding of a father's love, you can't stay the way you are. Artur Pawlowski.